All right, today's scripture is found in the book of Judges. Do you know where that is? Okay, Judges chapter 21, verse 25. It's just one verse. So let's all rise and read it together. God's word. Judges chapter 21, verse 25. Let's read it all together. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. Let's read it one more time. Ready? 시작. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. This is God's word. Before you sit down, I told you that every single one of us should have mentor and a coach and accountability partners and your successor, right? So today, our Miracleland Baptist Church have a special guest. He's my mentor. He's my coach, spiritual coach and mentor. Mr. Sung is right there. You see in the center? So yeah, welcome him. Let's greet him. Before you sit down, let's say hello to everyone. Say hello, welcome. Good to see you. Yes, let's be God's miracle. Yes, hello, good to see you. Let's be God's miracle. All right. Now, we have been studying about Israelites' history, right? And then their history is actually his story, right? We learned that throughout this history of Israelites, God is trying to tell all of us in all generations about very important messages. So we've been listening to that. Now, last week was the 50th anniversary for our church, and week before that was Easter Sunday. But then week before, we learned how Joshua took the Israelites and they crossed the Jordan River and they finally reached the Promised Land. They conquered the Jericho and the city of Ai. They've been conquering. Now today, we're studying the book of Judges. Now, the time frame of the book of Judges is after Joshua died, after Joshua passed away, and before Israelites received their first king. Do you remember who was the first king of Israel? King David? No. King Saul, right? You know that, right? You can say it out loud. We can relax a little bit. Yeah, King Saul. So it's after Joshua died and before King Saul became the king, okay? So that between time is about 350 years. Now, when God told Israelites to conquer the Promised Land, the land was actually very wide and big. But Joshua spent many years conquering. However, they did not finish in conquering all the land and cast out all the Canaanites. I mean, you can imagine, even today, thousands of years later, even with all these weapons that people have, even today, going a war is a hard thing to do, and many people suffer and died, and there are a lot of casualties and all this pain. So imagine, thousands of years ago, these people are fighting with the sword and spears. So going through the war is not an easy thing, and it takes a long time. So even Israelites and Joshua, they didn't conquer and they did not finish everything. But they stopped. They said, this is enough for all 12 tribes of Israel. So even the people are still there. We can still settle down here. So they distributed all this land and they settled down. In Judges chapter 1, verse 21, let me read just a couple of verses to see. Chapter 1, verse 21, it says, the Benjamites, however, failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites lived there with the Benjamites. So Jebusites were the Canaanites. They were supposed to be cast out. But Benjamites did not fully cast them out, but so they were living with them. Verse 28, when Israelite became strong, so going through the war, they become weak, right? But then even after they recover, even after they became strong, verse 28, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. So, we're going to see what happens if they don't do that. What happens in Judges chapter 1 and 2? The Israelites start worshiping idols. After Joshua died, and after all the elders who experienced all these great miracles that God performed, all those people passed away, and the new generation rose, but they did not worship the God of Israelites, the God of creation, but they start worshiping the false gods, the idols. In the land of Canaan, there were two main idols that were predominant in that land. One is the Baal. Baal is the god of storm. So it's in charge of sending the rain and letting the crops grow. So for them, it's very important because crops are very important source of, that's everything that they have. Without the crops, they cannot eat and survive. So the Baal was very important god. However, the way they worshipped, one of the things that they worship in their rituals is sacrificing their children, human sacrifice. So that's how evil these people were. The other idol was Ashtoreth. Yeah, Ashtoreth. That is a goddess of Canaanites, and she was the fertility god, but she was actually the mother of the Baal as well as concubine of Baal. So you can imagine how immoral and messed up this goddess is. Now, one of the rituals that they do is doing a lot of immoral sexual activities with this goddess and with the other people. So there were a lot of things that's going on. So you can imagine both Baal and Ashtoreth, God was not very pleased with these Israelites turning into worshiping these idols. Okay? Now, one thing that we can learn is when people of God compromise with the world, that means you are breaking the ties with God. Some people, they think that they can compromise with the world and at the same time compromise with God. Can you do that? Can you compromise with the world about your faith, your convictions, and at the same time just compromise? Just live in peace, let's just be cool. And so Ashtoreth and Baal, will come in peace. Is that what God does to people? Do you remember what Joshua did before he died? He gathered all the Israelites, and before he passed away, Joshua said, you need to choose today. You will either worship God of Israelites, God of our ancestors, God of creation, or you can worship the idols. You choose. But as for me and my house, we will worship the Lord. There is a major difference between the idols and God. The idols, the Baal and Ashtoreth, and all these gods and goddesses in Egypt, you know what they do is, you can worship all these different gods. They said, you can worship Baal on Monday, Ashtoreth on Wednesday. You want to worship Yahweh, your God? Fine, you do that on Friday. So it's okay. It's all, we're all good. Let's be good. Let's be cool. That's how the idols, these false gods, were doing. But what does God say? Did God say you can go and worship Baal on Monday and just come on Sunday and worship me? No. God said what? I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. That is the difference between the idols and our God. And so if you are compromising with the world, then you are actually breaking the ties with God. Now, these Israelites who live with these Canaanites, what they do is they keep making these cycles of pain and suffering and sin. So they start worshiping idols and they do all these rituals, making a child sacrifice and all this sexual immorality and all these things. So they sin against God. So God disciplines these people. God disciplines his people just like how the father disciplines his children. So the enemies attacked and they lost the war, so they were in pain. So they cry out to God, God, help us. Then God selects judge in the book of Judges. There are many judges that helps these Israelites to conquer and bring the victory. So God saves them. So they live peacefully for a while, as long as there is a judge like Samson and other judges that are here. But then when they passed away, back to their evil activities, doing all the evil things that these people were doing. And that's the cycle of what's going on. And even some of the judges, they are doing things more than what God asked them to do. There are some things that God didn't even bother to tell these judges to do, but yet they choose to do it. For example, I don't know how many of you know the names of the judges in the book of Judges, but I'm sure some of them are very familiar to you. Like Gideon. Do you remember the Gideon? He chose how many people to go up against the Midianites? Only 300 men, because God told him, that's more than enough, 300 right there. Going up against 135,000. 135,000 versus 300. Yet Gideon was able to bring victory because God was with him. But after that war, Gideon collected all the gold earrings and gathered all that. God didn't tell him to do that. But Gideon collected all that and he made this ephod, which is the priest's garment. And in that garment, there's all these jewelries, all this gold. And he made that. He thought that he can really, God will be very happy. But what ended up happening is all these people start worshiping to that gold image or the ephod, which is the cloth. So that was very much against what God intended. That was Gideon. There was another judge named Japheth, or it's hard to pronounce in English, but Ipta, anyway, in Korean. He was a very strong man, just like Samson. You thought that Samson was the only one who was very strong and good at fighting, but Ipta was also very good. But his brothers, because Ipta was born from a different mom, so Ipta was kicked out of the house. And then when the Canaanites attacked these people, their elders came to Ipta and said, please come and help us. I know that you are good at fighting. But Ipta said, you kicked me out, and now you're coming and asking me to help you? Well, then these elders said, we will make you to be our leader for our whole entire tribe. So Ipta came back, and he fought for Israelites, and he brought victory for these people. However, before the war, he makes this promise to God, which God didn't even ask. He said, if you bring me victory, then after the victory, when I come home, whoever comes out to greet me, I will give that person as a sacrifice to you. So he did. God brought victory, but when he came home, guess who came out first to greet him? I don't know why he made that such a silly promise. That's not very good promise. I mean, who did he expect? I don't know whether he was expecting his wife or his slaves. I don't know. But the one who came out of his house was his one and only daughter. He didn't even have any sons, but only one daughter. That's all he had. That precious daughter came out. So he was like ripping his clothes and said, oh no, what's going on? Why are you the one who's coming out first? So the daughter listens to all these things and says, Father, give me 2 months. Okay, 2 months. And then she goes up to the mountain and all she does is cry. I didn't even get to marry and I'm dying because of my dad's promise. And then after 2 months, she came back and Ipta killed his own daughter. Why did he do such a horrible thing? Is that what God wanted him to do? No. Why? Because he learned that from where? Was he thinking that, oh, I'm like Abraham who tried to sacrifice Isaac, so I am sacrificing my daughter? No, he learned it from worshiping Baal and Ashtoreth, these idols. So what that tells us is that Israelites, they did not know the character of their own God, the God of Israel. Do you think God of Israel wants you to kill your daughter or son if I bring you victory? Do you think you want me to, does God really want these people to make the golden image, to bow down and worship? They didn't know anything about God's character. They learned all those things from Canaanites who are worshiping idols. That's how distant these Israelites were. And it gets worse and worse. In chapter 19, there was I'm actually, it's hard for me to tell you this story because this is just too violent and it's evil. It's just too horrific story. So you can actually read the end of the Judges, like 19, 20, 21. It's all about these evil things that Israelites are doing. One of the priests goes to Bethlehem to take concubine, which is against God's will. But then the wife gets angry. They got into bubusaum, right? And then so she ran to her own home, stayed there for 4 months. So the husband goes after the wife and says, "Oh, come, let's go home." The father-in-law says, "Well, welcome home. Let's eat." So for 3 days, he was eating and drinking with his father-in-law. And the next day, he was trying to go back, taking his wife. Says, "Oh, have good breakfast." So keep on going and going. So he stayed there for 5 days and doing the same thing over and over. So finally, we got to go. So even after the breakfast, even though the daylight was already almost done, he tries to go back. And then he reaches Jerusalem. But in those days, do you remember I read you in chapter 1 that the Benjamites did not cast out all the Jebusites. So Jebusites lived in Jerusalem with the Benjamites. Do you remember that? I just read to you in the beginning. So these Jebusites were inside the Jerusalem. So this priest says, "I'm not going to sleep over tonight in Jerusalem where these Canaanites are living. So I'm going to go next door, next city, and that's where I'm going to stay because that's where Benjamites, Israelites are staying." So he did, but no one welcomes him, even though he was same Israelites. So he was in the courtyard doing, I don't know what to do, where do we sleep? Then this one elder comes out and come to my house. So, finally he got a place to stay. And while they were having a dinner and having a good time, these gangsters from the town, in the Benjamites, they came and demanded, "Hey, the man who came, take him out and let us have fun time with him." They were trying to do a gang rape against this man. And the story gets worse and worse. So instead of giving up this man, they try to give his daughter, and finally they gave his wife. And all night long they do something that is horrible and terrible. And in the morning, the wife just dies. So what does he do? This priest goes out. I don't know whether to tell you this. This is just too graphic. And so he does all kinds of these sins. He cuts this body into pieces and sends them to all these 12 tribes. So this is what happened in Benjamites, Israelites. So all Israelites, all 12 tribes came back to Benjamites and say, how come? And then these Benjamites, instead of repenting, they were fighting against all 11 tribes of Israelites. So they are going in a war. So 11 tribes against the Benjamites who did an evil thing. So Israelites just demolished, completely destroyed the Benjamites. So they were ripping their clothes off and say, "How can this be? We are chosen nation of God. And how can we kill each other like this and do these kind of evil things in front of God?" So they were all like tearing down That's basically the end of the story in the book of Judges. And at the very end, what's their excuse? That's the verse that we read. What's their excuse? It says, in those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. You know what that means? For 350 years, the Israel, 12 tribes of Israel, that means there was no difference between the Israelites, the chosen people of God, and the Canaanites who worshipped idols, who made a child sacrifice. There were no difference between these two groups of people. And unfortunately, even today, similar things are happening. You know how sad that story is? And we've been learning about this for years. From the Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth, and God created all of us, human beings, according to God's image. But yet, people keep rebelling, and people keep choosing to be their own God. So God chose Abraham to select and start brand new nation, to reveal who God is. God kept telling these people, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. And finally, with the Moses and 40 years in the wilderness, all these generations passed away because they disobeyed and didn't trust God. Yet finally, new generation rose, and Joshua took them to the promised land. Even all that, hard times and all those things, what happens? There is no difference between these Israelites and these Canaanites. How sad is this, right? And what's their excuse? Their excuse was because Israelites had no king. But in reality, they had a king. Who was their king? God was their king from the very beginning. But they wanted to see with their own eyes. We want the king that we can see. But what happens to all these people who led them? All these judges, Samson, Gideon, all those people, they brought victory for a while, for 10 years, 20 years, 40 years. But when they all passed away, Israelites went back to evil. It was even worse than before. So even today, these people, you know what these people are saying to Israelites? They say, there is no difference between the light and darkness. What? There's no difference between light and darkness? What are you talking about? Well, look at Israelites. They are the chosen nation. They're people of God, right? And Canaanites, they're just people, idol worshippers. But there is no difference. So there is no, you think you are light and these are dark? What? Darkness? No. There is no difference whatsoever. You know what? That's exactly what people are saying today. There is no difference between God and other gods. But you know what God says? God said, there is no common ground. God says, what do light have in common with the darkness? None. So that's the difference between the message that this world is trying to tell people and what God is trying to tell this world. God says, there is no common ground between God and idols. But this world says, hey, look at church, look at Christians. There is no difference, is it? God is calling people to be separated. The Nazarite, the Samson is Nazarite. What does that mean? That means separated, be different. The reason why God has chosen Israelites is for them to see, the people to see how different they are from all the other ones. When they don't have God as their king, this is what happens in the book of Judges. All these people killing each other and doing all these evil things. That's what happened to Israelites, to people. But when they lost their king, even Israelites, they're doing the same thing. The book of Judge, it's preparing the Israelites for their king. Because Israelites had no king, they did whatever they saw fit. So that's why the next book, after the Ruth, the 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd King, it's talking about why Israelites were so desperately in need and crying out for their king. Because of this, they were killing each other. But God wasn't very happy about King Saul. Israelites asking for king. God says, I am your king. Same thing is happening today. What about today for us, you and me? We need a king. We need the king. We need the king not just in our nation, but we need a king in our home. Who is the king in your house? Is it your dad? Then it can be good sometimes, but it can be bad sometimes. What about, is it your mom is the king or queen? It can be peaceful sometimes, but it can be, war sometimes, right? The true and only king that we need in our house is Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ is unchanging. He does not change. He's always the same, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And he's always faithful. And that's the king that we need in our house. And we need the king in our church. Who is the king in this church? Miracleland Baptist Church. Pastor Charlie Koo? No. Pastor Daniel? Yeah. Then we are in trouble. No. Who is the king of all the churches? Jesus Christ must be the king. What about the nation? Who is the king of United States of America? Jesus Christ has to be the king of our nation. And who is the king of your life? Just like the Israelites were killing each other, the world sometimes look at Christians and say, hey, there is no difference between the light and darkness. There is no difference between Christians and non-Christians. There is no difference. So don't tell me about Jesus, or don't tell me about church and Christianity. Why is that? It's because just like these Israelites, so many Christians and so many churches, even though God is right there, they have not yet accepted and placed God in charge of their lives, in charge of their house, in charge of their church. So church, Miracleland Baptist Church, our prayer is that you will make a decision to put Jesus Christ as your king in your life. And as the king for your home and for this church. Let Jesus be our king. Yesterday or last week, I talked about how so many people are building different churches, right? In a way, the Israelites, what were they doing? They were trying to build their kingdom. They want God to build them their kingdom, right? They want to use God to build their kingdom. So when God brings peace and victory, they were happy. Oh, that's what I wanted, God. But then they didn't want anything to do with God. So they went back to their evil ways. Same thing is happening today. So many people use God and use Jesus to build their church. And that's what's going to happen. But then some of the judges, what they were doing is They themselves were trying to build God's kingdom. Oh, I'm going to collect all the gold and I'm going to make this fancy clothes. And then what happened is these people end up worshiping the idols. Some people say, I will build his church. Just like this, these judges. So I will bring, whoever comes out first, I will even sacrifice my own kids for you. That's not what God wants. So when people say, I will build your church, there is a danger, just like these judges did. What we really need is Jesus Christ to build his church. And we are the people that he will build his church on.